This didn't just appear out of nowhere. Well, Darwin says, how do I explain the origin of species without bringing God into it? And he thinks deeply about this. He was a very clever guy. And he comes up, after reading Malthus, with natural selection. And goes into this whole idea of random chance. And I guarantee you, evolution is complete kufr. And if you believe in evolution, you have been duped and fooled. Really, duped and fooled. We do not believe in evolution. Absolutely not. And if you understand it, as the biologists do, and you still say that you believe in it, really it's like a hukm of ridda, because Allah does not, there's no chance in Allah's creation. Right? There's no random chance happening. You know, there's not mistakes made over and over again until it suddenly gets it right. Right? And then that gene is transmitted. And really, it's against the teaching of Islam. Which does not mean there's not microevolution and things, but the macroevolution is a story, it's a narrative. It is a narrative that explains the origin of man without any recourse to the divine. That's all it is. And if you believe it, you have to recognize the religious nature of the belief in that narrative. And again, it's taqleed, it's just blind imitation because most people are not biologists. Most people have not studied it. They're just taking for granted, oh, it must be true because he got a PhD from Harvard. Really, Harvard is like al-Bukhari used to be with the Muslims. Right? That's what they used to say. It's in Sahih al-Bukhari. Now they say, I heard it from a doctor from Harvard. And read what's going on in evolution. Read Darwin's Black Box. Right, the collapse of Darwinism, not from Christians. I don't read that stuff. The Christian creation science, spare me. You know, Earth was created 7,000 years ago on September 21st. You know, no thanks. But don't just catch on to the latest fad. And it's not late anymore. I mean, there's been neo-Darwinism. You know, they've gone on. They're not Darwinists, pure Darwinists anymore. They had to restructure the whole thing in the 1940s because there were so many holes in it. And then the 1950s, with the explosion of electron microscopy, they haven't dealt with the information they've got. This is what Behe's book, Darwin's Black Box. He's a microbiologist who's saying we've got some major holes here, and Darwinism doesn't answer them. Because the cell is not a simple organism. It is incredibly complex. There's more information in a unicellular bacteria than there are in all the libraries in New York City. And Darwin thought it was just empty protoplasmic nothingness down there if you got down deep enough. And we don't even know what's beyond that because we're limited. I mean, what if they discover another thing beyond that? We don't know if there's something underlying there. Really, we don't. It's all in يَتَّبِعُونَ إِلَّا الظَّنَّ. They follow conjecture. And their scientific theories are the latest and most explanatory to them to whatever they're looking at. So what happens then in the Muslim world? Well, I want just to bring another fellow, very important. And I would recommend Muslims reading this book, which is by David Fromkin, Peace to End All Peace. Because what happens basically is the Europeans desired the Muslim world for several reasons, but they really wanted the Muslim world. They wanted the wealth that was there, and they also wanted to basically destroy a continuing threat to them, which was Ottoman power. Because we forget that the Ottomans themselves were continuing their movement in the invasion of Europe, or what we would say the futuhat, really liberation of Europe. And so the Europeans were very frightened of them. But as the Ottomans began to diminish, become less and less powerful, and they obviously saw, and this is the tragedy of it, the Ottomans saw the waning of the Muslim powers and the waxing of the European powers. And what the Ottomans did at that point is that they began to bring European advisors in. And the Tanzimat of the 1840s is already a radical departure from the Islamic tradition. This is already happening within the Ottoman state, you see. And the Germans are being brought in, money is being borrowed. By the time Sultan Abd al-Hamid, great Muslim ruler, enters into power, he is literally powerless to change the massive destruction that had been done before him. And this is a good sign of a just ruler who can come into power, but because there's so much corruptive or corrosion at every other level, he's unable as an individual to do what it takes to complete the task at hand, which is to renew the Islamic tradition. The same is true in Morocco with Mulli Abd al-Hafid, who was a great Islamic ruler at the turn of this century. He's deposed by the French. He was a scholar, he was a lover of knowledge, and he was attempting to revivify the Islamic tradition within Morocco and to protect Morocco from the incursions of the Europeans, but he also failed. Now, what the Europeans call this is the great game. This is what they called it. They called it the great game, playing with the Muslims. And it's still going on. The game is still going on. And it's actually quite frightening, because what happens is what I'm becoming to realize now, is that all of the so-called liberation movements of the 1950s that were centered out of Egypt were in fact nothing other than the power plays of the Americans at removing the Europeans from their colonial influence in those lands. The Americans were directing those movements, and this evidence, I'm telling you, it's there. You can find it if you do the research. They were directing these movements, they were undermining the European power, and they were moving in for this Pax Americana, the American century, right, post-World War II. So many noble people fought from the Muslims with the best of intentions. Many of them died, and inshallah Allah give them Jannah. But the truth of the matter is, our countries, after all of that bloodshed and all of that suffering of the Algerian people, the land of 1 million martyrs, look at the state of Algeria now. Really, look at the state of Algeria now. 1 million martyrs fought. In the late 50s into 1962 were killed at freeing the French. And for what? For Ben Bella and Boumediene, people that betrayed the people that shed their blood for that land. And Ben Bella then becomes he's like he's saying now Islam is the only solution. It's what Sheikh Hisham al-Burhani, I was once in a gathering in the Emirates, and there was an ex-Syrian president there from the early 60s, can't remember his name, and he was saying how Islam is the only answer. And Sheikh Hisham al-Burhani said to him, why is it that you people never realize that when you're in power? And then when you lose your power, suddenly it becomes obvious. It's a very good question. Now, if you look at this book, it's very amazing. It really is extraordinary what that they were doing here. Right? Lord Kitchener. Kitchener sets out to capture Islam. Kitchener and his colleagues believed that Islam could be bought, manipulated, or captured by buying, manipulating, or capturing its religious leadership. And they did it. Seriously. They did it. There's Azhari Shuyukh that were in the same Freemasonic lodge as Lord Cromer in Egypt. It's historical fact. They're all declassified documentation. You can see their own handwritings, their own signatures. In fact, you get this blue, the Freemasonic, in the French Revolution, the Freemasonic colors were red, blue, and white. Equality, liberty, equality, and brotherhood, right? Load of nonsense, Freemasonic rubbish. right? And so you get the Azharis suddenly showing up with red and blue instead of black tassels. I'm not making this up. Blue instead of black tassels on their turbans. Where'd that come from? Red, blue, and white. Right there, the French flag up on his head. Now it's the American flag. He just needs some stars up there, right? Subhanallah. It's very sad. They were intrigued by the notion that whoever controlled the Khalif controlled Islam. And it was Kitchener actually did not want to split Islam up into several different countries. He wanted to control the Khalifa. And just he said, it's better if we got the leadership, we can control the whole thing at one time.